In this keynote presentation, I'm going to talk about how Appeon is making REST APIs RAD. RAD not just as in very cool, but also rapid application development. And this is being made possible by data window technology, as well as the new SnapDevelop tooling set that is being included in Power Builder 2019 R2. Now, what would you say if I told you with the new SnapDevelop 2019 R2, you could develop APIs in as little as 120 seconds? A little hard to believe, right? Well, let's see how this is possible. In an API, we're going to start with model because we're following an MVC architecture. And these models are automatically generated for you if you have an existing data window. If you don't, obviously you would have to spend time to design or create the model for your data window, or you could create the data window in the data window designer if you want to do it that way. But if you have an existing data window that you're looking to port into an API and use it there, that can be automatically generated for you using the data window converter of the SnapDevelop tooling. Now, this model generation has no SRD file. It's a standard model with class attributes, and it's meta-arm. So all of that good stuff that's in a data window data object are now inside of the model. It also supports data templates, import and export, defining how to export, import the data either in XML format or JSON format. Now, as I mentioned, if you have an existing data window with the automatic data window converter feature, you can generate this model in less than 40 seconds. You basically click on the data window that you want to convert, and 40 seconds later, you got your model. Now, the next step is there's a new scaffolding feature for C# that is provided in the SnapDevelop IDE starting with version 2019 R2. Now, the scaffolding takes care of automatically creating in C# both your service and controller. It can generate that simply based off of the model. So now that we have a data window converted to a model, the scaffolding engine will read that model and generate for you a working service or controller. And your service and controller can be designed to be called either by a PowerScript client, a generic client, not just Power Builder, or both. And the templates for the scaffolding engine are customizable, or you could even create your own to fit your needs. Now, this scaffolding step only takes 40 seconds to run as well. And finally, you want to test your API to make sure it works. Now, we provide a great white box testing tool for those of you familiar with Postman, or other API testers like that. It's something kind of similar. We think it's better. That's why we actually put the effort to build this, because it makes it really productive to test out the .NET data store. This tool is actually aware of the .NET data store and even supports stepping through your code, debugging the API while the tester is running. So that's really nice. Now, obviously, if you're going to write unit testing scripts, that's going to take you more than 40 seconds. But as a first step, before you write unit testing scripts, you want to just quickly do basic white box testing to see even if your API is properly deployed and running at a high level. And so for that sort of white box testing, you can complete that in as little as 40 seconds as well. So adding up all the 40 seconds, we come to just under 2 minutes to create an API. So I'm going to turn over to Govinda, and I'm going to take out my stopwatch. We're going to time him. No pressure here, Govinda. We're going to see how Govinda delivers developing an API in 120 seconds. Wow, Govinda, that was impressive. You beat the clock with time to spare. All right, so now that Govinda ran through that very quickly to show you how fast and easy it can be to develop an API, let's talk about how feature rich it is. We're not just about speed. This new capability in 2019 R2 provides a very rich feature set. So let's take a look at the SnapDevelop IDE itself. It's a C-sharp IDE for developing web APIs. Over time, it's going to be expanded, but as of right now, that's what it does. It does it really well, but it does one thing: developing web APIs. So it's included with every subscription of Power Builders starting with 2019 R2. Yeah, so that's a big change Appian has made. Rather than having to get into the cloud edition or higher, every single edition of Power Builder is now going to be able to develop cloud architecture applications. And so that's why we've included it. Now, the SnapDevelop IDE provides the C-sharp scaffolding, what you briefly saw in Govinda's demo. And it also has a number of C-sharp code assistants that if you have any errors in your code, it really helps you to fix those issues. And it offers some basic C-sharp refactoring tools. And the new REST API testing and debugging, which, again, you briefly saw that demoed in what Govinda showed you. And we've integrated the XUnit testing framework. Now, you can use NUnit. You're going to hear from some of our customer success stories that have already moved to C# with 2019, and some of them have used NUnit. But if you're looking to use XUnit, you're going to get a much better experience if it's integrated into the IDE, which is what we've done with SnapDevelop. It includes solution management, so it's a full-featured IDE. It's not just a code editor or something like that. We've also integrated NuGet package management. We have Docker integration so that it's very easy to publish, test, and deploy Docker containers. It supports both .NET and .NET Core, so you have both types of projects. And then now let's talk about the data window converter. So on top of the SnapDevelop IDE, Appian has developed the data window converter plugin. And so that's why SnapDevelop, a vanilla C# IDE, is able to handle your data windows and bring data window technology into your APIs. So the data window converter really consists of the data window library itself that gives you the .NET data store, plus its related productivity tools. Now, this is included with Power Builder Cloud Edition or higher. So if you're there's only one edition of Power Builder that doesn't have it. It's basically the lowest edition. As long as you get up from the lowest edition, you're going to benefit from data window productivity in creating your APIs, versus in the lowest edition, you can still create APIs, just not using the data window technology to accelerate that. So the .NET data store is included, and that supports any .NET language. But if you're going to use the SnapDevelop tooling, the SnapDevelop is a C# IDE, so you'd be coding in C# if you're going to use the tooling we provide instead of, for example, Visual Studio. Now, the SnapDevelop has another very nice feature that's included in this data window plugin: the ability to load your PowerScript project into the SnapDevelop IDE. And you might have briefly noticed that in Govinda's demo. He was able to right-click on the PowerScript data window and then have that converted by the data window converter. So the data window converter is basically the C# model generator. It's taking the data window and then generating that C# model, or converting the data window to a C# model that the .NET data store needs to use in runtime. Now, the data window converter also includes scaffolding templates specific for the .NET data store that plug into the scaffolding engine provided by SnapDevelop. So, of course, you could create your own templates, but we've already helped you get started with some starter templates, which Govinda used in his demo. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Govinda, and this time he's going to be talking a little bit instead of just racing through all that, and really show off a lot of these new features I talked about, as well as some of these are old features that have been enhanced. So Govinda's going to do a very thorough walkthrough and show you all that good stuff.
Thank you, Armeen. Okay, so now let's take a look into some more enhancements for the next release. So you'll notice that I have SnapDevelop open, right? But if I right click on the solution, I can also open the PV workspace right in here. So I had already opened one before, so I'll click OK. See right here we have both the workspace, the target, we also have the libraries and the objects inside of it. I can also filter out what objects I want to see right here, filter Power Builder objects, and I can select whichever I want to see on my Solution Explorer. So I'm going to click cancel right here. But now I can also export the data windows if I wanted to by the whole group. I can just right click on the workspace, or I can select the data window itself by clicking on it and convert data window to C# model. So let's do that. Now it's going to be asking me for the database connection that I want. I'll click OK. And this is the data window I want to be exporting. So I'll click right here. And you'll notice right here that it's going to be asking me what folder I want to save this into. So since I already did this before, let's scroll down and select the models folder. I'll click OK, export, and it exported it for me. So let's take a look at it. Right over here on the models, you see that it actually exported the customer model or data store for me. So one of the nicest features of this is that if you click on it and right click on the model you want, you'll get a new menu. This is the menu option named scaffold. Now scaffolding can be done to the data store objects or to the SQL model mapper. But in this case I have two options for each one of them. Now the first one is I can create a controller if I already have a service, or I can create a service and a controller based on the model, and this is a data store model. So I can also do the same for the SQL model mapper. But in this example I'll use the data store. So I'll click right here. Now on this window you'll notice that we have templates. I can create my services based on templates. We actually have created 3 templates for you, but you can actually create your own if you wanted to. So let me show you the ones that we have. Now the first template is if you wanted to consume your web API with a Power Builder application. The second one is if you wanted to consume your web API with any generic UI technology, for example ASP.NET. Now the third one is here if you wanted a combination of both. So since I've already done A, I'll select the second one. Now remember I told you that you can create your own templates. Well, if you wanted to, then you can also set the parsing rules for them right here. So let's take a look a little bit more into this. You'll see that this is the project for the web API, the subfolder, the data context. You can also create a new one if you don't have anyone right here, or if you needed to. The namespace for the controllers and for the targets as well, the services, I'm sorry. Now let's click right here and you'll see how the HTTP verbs are already set up for me right in here. So I'll just click OK. So this has actually created a new interface for me right in here. And it has also created the service and the controller. But we still need to add this by using the dependency injection, and we can do that by clicking on startup, scrolling a little bit down, and right in here I'll add a new line saying services.add_scoped, and I would select the new customer service, and now the service itself, customer service right here, and here we go. I have already made my service available for my web API. Now let's take a closer look into one of the controllers. So if I double click right here and scroll down to the retrieve method, inside of this method, if I right click anywhere inside of it, I'll get a new menu option. So the new menu options is run test. I'll click on this, and what we will be getting is a new awesome tool. This tool is called the Web API testing tool, or the Web API tester. Now this is a very nice and very handy tool because it's actually a tool used for mocking data from the data store and my web API. So I can actually test my web APIs using mocked data store data. That's one of the things. Now another one of the things, why is this so useful? It's because you don't actually have to be managing a lot of JSON just to get tests going on. And the second reason for this is because you don't have to create a UI so that you can test your web APIs. You can just test them out right here on the spot. So this saves you a lot of time because of the same reasons. But hey, let's take a closer look into this. So right here you'll notice that you get the HTTP verb that this retrieve method is actually needing, and this is the URL for the controller that I just clicked on. So I'll click on send. Notice how we have the response body right here. This is a JSON returned for this department data store. So in here we have additional information that really is handy for my testing purposes. So in here you see that I have the status, it's a 200, okay, the time and the size of this response. But I also have the headers right here. So I have the general headers, it's the request URL, the method, and the status code. This is really handy because it helps me catch any mistake I have done from the very beginning. So this right here is the response headers, and this is the request headers as well. But hey, let's look at it right up in here. So you see that I have the parameters section right here. If I had any parameters that this method would require, then I would put them in here. Here are the headers for this request. It has already set up the headers that the controller needs for me, or I can add or modify any one that I want. So I'll click here, accept encoding. This is going to be gzip, so this is going to be managing compression. And here we have the body. So let's click right here on send again, and notice how it's actually accepting the gzip encoding format for me. So now if we take a closer look at some of the nicest features of this, is if we continue to the next method of the controller. This is the update method, and right here you'll see that you can actually perform the whole CRUD functionalities of the testing of your web API. So remember I told you this was actually a mocking the data store. So here is the data store. Notice how it's actually already brought all the data from the data store, that is the columns that I need. It's actually bringing for me the data types that each one of the columns requires. This is a string, and look at this, this is nice. So if I had a Dropbox, then I'll get that in here as well. But hey, let's take a look at how this is actually going to be performing the CRUD. So one of the first things that we might need to look into is the retrieval. So if I wanted to retrieve this for mocking the data, then I just click here and I'll get this window. On this window I can see that I have three options. The first one is I can select which retrieve method I want to use based on the history that I have called before, or I can select based on the controller that I might be using or needing, or I can also select based on a specific URL. So for this example, I'll select from a controller. Click OK. So notice how this actually retrieved the data store for me. So that takes care of the retrieval of the data store. Now let's take a look at the creation of the data store. So if I wanted to mock the creation of a new row, I click right here and I'll type in a name. So right in here, 2019. Now let's take a look at how this is actually going to be managing the data for this mocking data store. If I click right here on body and I scroll down, you'll notice that this actually has created a new data window JSON for me. And in this JSON I have the primary rows buffer. Notice how this primary rows buffer has already added the new department for me. So I'll click back in here. I'll save this into the web API by clicking right here on send. Notice how this returned the status code 200 for me. But let's take a look if this actually got saved. So I'll retrieve this again. See, this actually added a new department ID for me. That's department number 22. So that takes care of the creation. Now let's take a look at the update. Now what if I wanted to change something from here? Let's take a look how this modified my body for me. So if I scroll down, I'll see that I have the primary rows buffer, and then I have the previous value of the name and then the new value of it. So let's go back and save this. I'll click OK and send. This got saved by returning a status code of 200. Let's make sure that this is true. Click right here, click OK, and you'll notice down here that this actually got saved. So that takes care of the update. But how about the delete? So I can actually delete one row, but remember this is mocking the deletion, so I'll click mock deleting row. And let's take a look at the body. Now in the JSON, the data window JSON, you'll see that it automatically added into the delete rows buffer the specific department ID that I wanted to get deleted. So let's get back here and let's save this web API by clicking on send, and let's retrieve this to make sure that it properly worked, and you'll see that it automatically deleted that for me. So that takes care of the deletion. But what if I was actually using a freeform web API or a freeform data store in my web API? So I can just click right here and you'll see that I'm actually using one row at a time. So this is actually testing the web API. But now let's take a quick look if I wanted to actually do debugging of the web API. I can just select insert a breakpoint into my web API method. I right click right here, select debug tests. Let's run that. So it's actually opening up the debug web API tester tool for me. Here it is. I will now click send, and notice how it actually hit the breakpoint right here with the traditional information for me to debug my web API. So that's it for today. Thank you very much.